The Siege of the Alamo was a 13-day-long siege that lasted from February 23, 1836 to March 6, 1836. After the defeat of the Mexican army at the Siege of Bexar, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna began assembling a large force to restore order in Texas, and by the end of 1835, his army numbered at about 6,000 soldiers. Santa Anna personally led the bulk of his troops inland to San Antonio de Bexar and ordered General José de Urrea to lead 550 troops along the Atascosita road towards Goliad. When Mexican troops departed San Antonio in early December 1835, Texian soldiers established a garrison at the Alamo Mission, a former Spanish religious outpost which had been converted into a makeshift fort. Described by Santa Anna as an irregular fortification, hardly worthy of the name, the Alamo had been designed to withstand an attack by Native American tribes, not an army equipped with artillery. The fort was commanded by James C. Neal, a former U.S. Army artilleryman. Because of his artillery experience and his regular Army commission, Neal was a logical choice to command the fort. Some 21 artillery pieces of various calibers were captured after the Siege of Bexar. Throughout January, he did his best to fortify the mission on the outskirts of town and would have Major Green B. Jameson, chief engineer of the Alamo, to install most of the cannons. Jameson constructed catwalks to allow the defenders to fire over the wall. However, this method left the rifleman's upper body exposed. The Texian garrison at Bexar was greatly undermanned and underprovisioned, with fewer than 100 soldiers remaining by January 6, 1836. Neal requested additional troops and supplies, stressing that the garrison was likely unable to withstand a siege lasting longer than 4 days. The Texian government was in turmoil and unable to provide much assistance. On January 14th, Neal approached Sam Houston, asking him for assistance in gathering supplies, clothing, and ammunition. Houston could not spare the number of men necessary to mount a successful defense. He instead sent Colonel James Bowie with 30 men to remove the artillery from the Alamo and destroy the complex. But he was unable to transport the artillery since the Alamo garrison lacked the necessary draft animals. Bowie was impressed with the work Neal had done on the mission, and it had begun to look like an actual fort. Neal soon persuaded Bowie that the location held strategic importance. In a letter to Governor Henry Smith, Bowie stated, "Colonel Neal and myself have come to the solemn resolution that we will rather die in these ditches than give it up to the enemy." Bowie would also write to the provisional government asking for men, money, rifles, and gunpowder. Few reinforcements were authorized. Cavalry officer William Barrett Travis arrived with 30 men on February 3rd. 5 days later, a small group of volunteers arrived, including the famous frontiersman and former U.S. Congressman Davy Crockett. After Colonel Neal left the Alamo to tend to an ill family member, Travis and Bowie were left to command the garrison. Both men had strong personalities, and they regularly argued over who was in command. Volunteers comprised much of the garrison, and they were unwilling to accept Travis as their leader. The men instead elected Bowie, who had a reputation of fierce fighting. Bowie celebrated by getting very intoxicated and creating havoc in Bexar, but he would later agree to share command with Travis as a result of ill feeling. The first group of Santa Anna's army arrived on February 23, 1836. By this time, Bowie had become seriously ill and was bedridden. Both Travis and Bowie thought that the cold and rainy weather would delay the Mexican advance by at least 3 more weeks, but they underestimated the anger and determination of Santa Anna. Santa Anna wanted revenge for his brother-in-law's defeat at the Alamo and pushed his troops hard to achieve victory quickly and completely. As the Mexican army marched into the city, the Mexican troops raised a blood-red flag, signifying no quarter. Travis ordered the Texians to gather as much food, ammunition, and other supplies and bring it into the Alamo to prepare for a siege. Around 1,500 Mexican soldiers occupied San Antonio. After surrender negotiations failed, Travis ordered a cannonball be fired at the Mexican army, formally beginning the Siege of the Alamo. The first night of the siege was relatively quiet. On February 24th, Travis would write his famous plea for help in a letter titled, "To the People of Texas and All Americans in the World," and he would also send out several other letters requesting for reinforcements. At the end of the first day of the siege, Santa Anna's troops were reinforced by 600 men under General Joaquin Ramirez y Sesma, bringing the Mexican army up to more than 2,000 men. Over the next few days, Mexican soldiers established artillery batteries, initially 1,000 feet from the south and east walls of the Alamo. A third battery was positioned southeast of the fort, and each night the batteries inched closer to the Alamo walls. During the first week of the siege, more than 200 cannonballs landed in the Alamo Plaza. At first, the Texians matched the Mexican artillery fire, often reusing the Mexican cannonballs. As the news of the siege spread throughout Texas, potential reinforcements gathered in Gonzales. They hoped to meet up with Colonel James Fannin, who was expected to arrive from Goliad with his garrison. On February 26, after days of deciding what to do, Fannin ordered 320 men, 4 cannons, and several supply wagons to march towards the Alamo, 90 miles away. This group traveled less than 1 mile before turning back. Fannin blamed the retreat on his officers, while the officers and enlisted men accused Fannin of aborting the mission. On March 1, 1836, 32 volunteers arrived from Gonzales, commanded by Captain Albert Martin, bringing the Texian force up to 260 men. Yet, there would be no other reinforcements to relieve the Alamo. It became obvious that the Texians in the Alamo were doomed. For the duration of the siege, both the Texian army and the Mexican army watched and waited. The Mexican artillery pounded the thick limestone walls of the Alamo regularly. The Texians were kept busy repairing damaged walls, building cannon platforms, and sneaking out for help. At night, the Texian soldiers could see the Mexican soldiers gathering around their campfires and would often hear them playing music. One Mexican soldier reported that Davy Crockett was standing on the wall, playing his violin. There was no doubt the soldiers on both sides were thinking of home and more peaceful days. Travis made one last attempt for help in a letter to the delegates of the Convention of 1836, who were signing the Texas Declaration of Independence at Washington on the Brazos. According to legend, Travis gathered his men and explained that an attack was imminent. He supposedly drew a line in the ground and asked those willing to die for the Texian cause to cross and stand alongside with him. Only one man, Moses Rose, was said to have declined. Whether the story is true or not, it is still clear that the people of the Alamo were willing to die for their cause, and on March 6, 1836, the Battle of the Alamo began.